So in a moment, I have the honor and pleasure of welcoming up Lauren Herman to the Bima to offer our Dvar Torah this evening. We are so fortunate here at Barnert to have so many people who are passionate about their work and experts in their field, and Lauren is one of those people. I want to give you her formal bio. Lauren is the legal director at Make the Road, New Jersey, which is a member-led community organization that builds the power of Latinx and working-class communities through organizing, policy innovation, transformative education, and survival services. Lauren has worked for Make the Road New Jersey for the past 10 years, where she and her team help clients on a range of immigration, tax, housing, and employment issues. Lauren graduated from Harvard Law School in 2013 and also received a master's in theological studies from Harvard Divinity School in 2014. After law school, Lauren clerked for the Honorable Chief Justice Stuart Rabner at the Supreme Court of New Jersey. And prior to law school, Lauren was trained as a community organizer through Join for Justice, the Jewish Organizing Institute and Network for Justice. She worked as a community organizer at the Workers' Circle and at the Harvard University Committee on Human Rights Studies. So, Lauren, thank you so much for being here and sharing your voice and your perspective with us this evening. Go ahead, right there.
Thank you. Thank you all, and thank you for being here. So I wanted to talk about tonight's Torah portion, and one thing that really struck me in reading this week's Torah portion, which is Matot Maseh, is the discussion of due process. So as the Israelites are preparing to enter the Promised Land, there are a lot of instructions. They're given directives about how to draw the proper borders, how land should be allotted, and how the spoils of war should be distributed. And among all these directions, God instructs Moses to create cities of refuge. The Parsha explains that it is important to have places where people who accidentally harm others can flee until they've had an opportunity to stand trial. It is essential, our tradition teaches, that everyone has a chance to stand in judgment before the community, before they face a sentence. What's more, the cities are meant to serve not only the Israelites, but the Gerim, or the strangers or resident aliens as well. The cities of refuge were intended for anyone who needed to flee. And it says, "Such shall be the law of procedure throughout the ages in all your settlements." Much of the rest of the discussion, particularly regarding capital punishment, would no longer comport with a system of justice that I could get behind. But even in such a system, there was an emphasis on procedure and a fair process. This stood out for me in reading the Torah portion because it stands in such stark contrast to one of the trends I find most alarming in the current immigration system in the U.S. today. I am afraid that in our cities, where so many people seek refuge, we have abandoned our principles of due process. The Refugee Convention, which was developed in international law in direct response to the horrors of the Holocaust, is codified in American law, and it provides a process for anyone fleeing persecution to seek refuge. The law states that anyone who has a well-founded fear of persecution on account of certain protected characteristics like race, religion, nationality, political opinion, is legally permitted to seek asylum and ask for protection. However, in my work, every day, I see our government eliminating these opportunities for protection. There are so many reasons that immigrants come to our cities, right? And Rabbi Scheffler spoke about some of the reasons that our families came here earlier. Many people arrive seeking refuge, many are seeking a better future or want to reunite with family. And their stories often echo those of generations of immigrants who came before. However, now they are not facing a fair procedure. Instead, the Department of Homeland Security is denying due process so they can more quickly deport people to countries where, for so many people, they face harm and where their lives may be at risk. Additionally, at the same time that the current administration is targeting all immigrants without status for deportation, They are also terminating various relief programs and taking protected status away from people who currently have it so that they too can be deported. A few weeks ago, the Department of Homeland Security announced a new initiative to denaturalize immigrants who had become citizens already. They were asking their staff to come in on the weekends to get special training for this. And there have been numerous efforts to deport immigrants with green cards, with student visas, and other forms of relief. This represents a radical departure from how immigration enforcement has been conducted in the past. Part of the problem is that we haven't had any sort of immigration reform in over 30 years. This has been a problem across administrations, across political parties, and it means that our current system is outdated and doesn't meet the needs of what's happening in reality. Immigration law is quite complex, and while most people are familiar with green cards and asylum, there's actually an entire alphabet of visas and other programs that have been created as patches to a broken system. So, for example, we're going to do a little quiz here. There are several different forms of deferred action, like DACA. Has anyone heard of DACA? Hands, right? Does someone want to take a stab at what's DACA? Or what do you know about DACA?
So if it's the deferred action for childhood admission.
Arrivals, yeah.
All right, arrivals. So if you came in before the age of 16, you could, back a few years ago, make this application so that you could get a social security card and a work permit, and it deferred decisions on you, I believe, for 10 years.
Close. You were really close. You got a lot of the requirements, right? So deferred action for childhood arrivals, a lot of people know it as the Dreamers, right? So it's for people, immigrants who came here as children under 16, and they could apply, go through a whole application process. And the one part that you were missing is deferred action means protection from deportation. And it's actually only for 2 years. So and the program was created in 2014, I believe. It was 2012. And every 2 years, the people who have DACA have to renew their status and apply again. And there have been, since the first Trump administration, efforts to dismantle DACA and take away DACA. There have been multiple lawsuits. It's gone up to the Supreme Court, down from the Supreme Court, and it's still currently in limbo. Okay, so now how about temporary protected status? Have folks heard temporary protected status? Fewer people. Okay. Yep, that's great. So temporary protected status is actually codified in the immigration law. It's a statute, and it provides, as it says, temporary status to people who are coming from a country, and they actually have to be here in the U.S. already at the time their country is designated. So basically, the government says it is too dangerous for you to go back to your country, and it could be because of war or violence, but it could be because of a natural disaster. There were designations around earthquakes or massive flooding or those sorts of things as well. And the government says, again, it's too dangerous for you to return to your country at this time, so you have a process where you can apply, and like DACA, you can get a work permit and protection from deportation for a period of time. And there have been many countries over the years that have been designated for TPS. Okay, the last one. This one's a little bit harder. Humanitarian parole. Anyone want to try? No one. Okay. So humanitarian parole is another, there's different forms of humanitarian parole, but basically it's a process by which people can request permission to come in for a humanitarian reason, and they're given a lawful admission. And so once someone receives protection, you guys did really well. Good job. I'm impressed. So once someone receives protection under one of these programs, as we've said, they're able to get a work permit, they're able to begin to establish themselves. And for some people, like those who have TPS or temporary protected status from Honduras and Nicaragua, they have been here for decades, right? The designation was made like 30 years ago, and people have been, again, renewing their status every couple of years. Over the past 6 months, the administration has terminated TPS for nearly every country that had received a designation. The only country that they redesignated was South Sudan. Every other country, they've terminated status. They've canceled 2 parole programs that created a lawful process for people to come to the U.S. Through this entry. And there have been many efforts to push back on the terminations. As I mentioned with DACA, right, there have been all sorts of lawsuits, but the end result is that now hundreds of thousands of people, if you count all of the programs together, it's probably millions, who followed the rules, filled out their applications, paid their fees, and came to the U.S. with permission, are now left in a lurch while their future is fought out in the courts. A few months ago, we were preparing for a clinic to help many Haitian clients apply for asylum because they feared returning to their country, which is currently suffering political violence and instability. Most of them had arrived on one of these parole programs that provided a parole process for immigrants from Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, and Venezuela that had since been terminated. A federal judge in Massachusetts had temporarily halted the termination while the court considered the underlying merits of the case, and whether they considered if the government could lawfully end the program in such an abrupt manner. However, the morning of our clinic, as people were arriving in the church, we got a news alert that the Supreme Court had allowed the terminations to go into effect while the case proceeded in the courts. So this meant that in an instant, all of these individuals who are now waiting for our clinic were once again thrown into the uncertainty of whether they were in protected status or not, whether their work permits were valid or not, and whether they were at immediate risk of deportation. Though we did our best to help these folks to navigate their next steps and to try to understand what they could do, so many people are put in a position where they don't even know what the best process is for them to follow to seek relief. I want to share another story from one of my clients that is especially disturbing and I think really illustrates the trend of denying a fair process. Adam, which is not his real name, was born in Mexico, where he suffered a birth trauma and was cut off from oxygen for a period of time, which left him with undiagnosed intellectual disabilities and some health complications. Adam came to the U.S. with his mom when he was about 4 years old. His father was abusive to both him and his mother throughout his life. We first met Adam about 6 years ago, back in 2019. He had been detained by ICE, and because he didn't fully understand the process and because he has trouble with verbal communication, he told them that he just wanted to be deported. And so the judge signed the order. My team was able to jump in and file an emergency motion to reopen his case. The judge granted our motion just in time, and we were able to reach the deportation officer on the phone, who literally pulled him off of the plane. After we were able to get him released from detention, we helped Adam apply for special immigrant juvenile status, which is a humanitarian visa for children who have been abused, abandoned, or neglected by one of their parents. Though the initial part of his case was approved, there are long wait lists for these types of cases, and so he was still waiting to apply for his green card. We also helped him to apply for asylum because he truly was afraid of getting sent back to Mexico after having lived most of his life in the United States. One thing that many people may not realize is that the immigration courts are incredibly backlogged, and so deportation cases often take years to be adjudicated, sometimes decades. The best estimates suggest that at the end of 2024, there were about 3.7 million cases pending nationally, and here in New Jersey, there were approximately 150,000 cases in the backlog. And so although Adam's case began in 2019, he was scheduled for his final hearing on April 1st of this year, 2025. Prior to the hearing, we filed a motion to ask the judge to assess his competency and to provide certain safeguards to accommodate his disabilities. Additionally, we filed over 1,000 pages of evidence demonstrating that he would face serious harm or death if he were forcibly returned to Mexico. We showed up for court that morning, ready to fight for Adam's rights. However, plainclothes ICE agents were waiting for him in the hallway, and they whisked him away from us and detained him before we could even enter the courtroom. Despite our pleas that Adam was not a flight risk, that he was literally attempting to attend his hearing, and that he needed access to his family and to his attorneys so that he could properly argue his case, ICE proceeded to transfer him multiple times over the next few days. Neither we nor his mother could locate him for several days until we were finally able to find him in the soft-sided detention facility, which is a fancy way to say a tent on the side of the road in Texas. Once he was detained, Adam became very ill and quite depressed. He felt hopeless and repeatedly insisted that he just wanted to be sent to Mexico. Ultimately, after the judge in Texas denied his bond request, we agreed to stop fighting his case, and that is what happened. Since that court hearing in April, we have now heard countless stories where this has become the new norm. And I'm actually curious, have folks heard about this happening in courts, people getting picked up in courts, right? That's no, so some yes, some no. So it's, mixed of what's getting out into the broader public. So despite immigrants' efforts to show up to court to seek due process, they are being denied the opportunity. ICE agents are showing up in immigration court to detain immigrants before they even have a chance to attend their hearings. What's worse, the attorneys who work for ICE are asking the immigration judges to dismiss removal proceedings on the pretense that they no longer wish to pursue the case, so that as soon as the person walks out the door, the agents can then arrest and detain these individuals and have them expeditiously removed. In other words, so that they can deport them without a hearing and without any sort of process. The only process they're given: dismiss the case, arrest, detain, deport. This new practice violates our American values of fairness and due process, and as we see in this week's Torah portion, it also goes against our instructions in the Torah. The immigrants and asylum seekers who are fleeing to our cities deserve a chance to have their trial, to present their evidence, to make their case before they are sent back to the places they fled. Every immigrant and every family has their story to tell. As an American and as a Jew, I can't stand by and watch as our government cuts corners and denies due process again and again and again. It is cruel and unjust. We can and must do better. The most often repeated mitzvah in the Torah is to care about the ger, as Rabbi Scheffler brought to us earlier, the stranger, because we were strangers in the land of Egypt. This mitzvah appears 36 times. And here in New Jersey, we are so fortunate to live in a deeply diverse and immigrant-rich state. New Jersey is home to more than 2 million immigrants, and it is estimated that 1 in 4 New Jersey residents is an immigrant. Even those of us who are citizens are likely impacted by what is happening to immigrants now. So for a show of hands, how many of you either personally are affected or know someone who is directly impacted by what's happening to immigrants now? So, raise them high and, look around, right? That's a lot of people here. I don't know if anyone wants to share, if anyone feels comfortable sharing. No pressure.
My neighbor is a grandmother caring for her grandchildren and was picked up by ICE, and her kids, the grandkids, were put into foster care without warning. They just showed up at our building. And we've been trying to organize getting the kids resources.
That's horrible. Thank you. Yes, so for the people in the ether, this woman, I'm sorry, I don't know your name, Rachel. Her neighbor is a grandma who was caring for her grandchildren, and she was picked up by ICE unexpectedly, and the children had to go into foster care, and she and their neighbors have now been organizing to try to get resources, to try to get to support for this family. Thank you, Rachel.
So my colleague's daughter's friend's father was getting out of his car, and ICE grabbed him. He's a citizen. They threw his keys into the crowd, and the family has no money. I don't know if they know where he is right now, but they're trying to locate him. He's missing.
Wow. And I'm sorry, your name? Patty. I knew that. So Patty's colleague's daughter's friend's father was picked up getting out of his car. He is a U.S. citizen, and ICE detained him and threw his keys. And the family is currently trying to find him, figure out where they have no money, no resources to try to help fight what's going on. So Rachel said she volunteers at a food pantry, and they have families who have been coming for years to get food there who are now essentially hiding out in the woods and are afraid to even come to get their food, and so they have to send friends instead to pick up the food for them.
I'm involved with an organization that provides free medical care to uninsured people, and many of our patients are undocumented, or maybe they have other status, but several of them have been just picked up on the street. And we notice a lot of them are not showing up for their medical care. And some are able to do it telehealth. But if you need a hands-on appointment, it's hard for them to come. They don't want to leave their home.
And I'm sorry, what was your name?
Jen,
So Jen or Janet? Janet. Volunteers for an organization that provides medical care to people who are uninsured or underinsured, and she said both that they have several patients who have been picked up, who have been detained, as well as many families that are just no longer showing up because they're afraid and are not able to access the medical care that they need. Thank you all for sharing the stories, and I'm sure that there are many, many more. So if you, like me, are concerned about the ways that our government's approach to immigration violates our deeply held values as Jews and as Americans, what can we do? There are a few ways that we can fight for a more fair and just system. First, here in New Jersey, there is currently a bill before the legislature called the Immigrant Trust Act, or the ITA. Has anyone heard of it? Oh, all right, two. You guys read my speech beforehand. That's cheating. Okay. The Immigrant Trust Act.
It's in emails from Social Justice Committee.
Oh, okay. So nobody's reading their emails from Social Justice Committee. We've now found out. So the Immigrant Trust Act is intended to protect immigrants in New Jersey and ensure that here in our state, they can continue to access the protections of our state laws like all other residents. And so some of the things that the Immigrant Trust Act does is provide policies for food pantries, for medical centers, so that people feel safe coming forward to get that care that they need. We know that right now, because of the current climate, many immigrant community members no longer feel safe reporting crimes, showing up for family court, etc. The Immigrant Trust Act is an important step in safeguarding these processes for all people in New Jersey and helps to make us all safer. What can you do? Call and email your state legislators, even over the summer. They're still working. It makes a difference. How can you do this? You can sign up to be, at the ONEG, we're going to have sign-up sheets, and you can sign up to be part of Barnert's call-in day this fall. You can spend an hour or a few making calls. We will provide the numbers, the scripts, and the noshes. And you can read in the Tuesday Social Justice e-blast. Hopefully now you'll read it. You'll be on the lookout. And you can click on the links so that you can urge your legislatures to pass this legislation. Second, we can show up. As our friends and neighbors are required to show up for check-ins with their deportation officers, for their court dates, or to visit loved ones in detention, we can step up to volunteer for accompaniment. We can use our presence to bear witness to what is happening and help make someone feel less alone in a stressful moment. We want to start an accompaniment team here at Barnert. You can be trained by our allies at First Friends of New Jersey. They're incredible. And you can then be called on to accompany people in the community. Again, you can sign up at the ONEG for more information. Finally, we can speak out. The denial of due process and the attempts to swiftly deport so many of our immigrant community members is not normal, and it is not fair. We must continue to fight the normalization of what's happening. Speak to your elected representatives and ask them to do everything in their power to protect our communities. Speak to your friends, family, neighbors, and vote this November. Our local elections really matter. If you're interested, again, we're going to have signups at the ONEG. So that's a lot of information, but I wanted to end on a hopeful note. Despite everything that is happening, I deeply believe that when we speak up for our values and when we fight, we can win. Just yesterday, after months of community pressure, the Union County Commissioners publicly agreed that they would not allow their jail facility, which is currently for sale, to be used for immigration detention. And it literally has taken since March pressuring them every single month to make this public commitment, but they did. This is a huge victory and proof that our communities are powerful, and this is a hugely important step to ensure dignity and respect for New Jersey immigrants. I am hopeful that we will see many more victories in the days to come, and I hope you will join us to make that a reality. Thank you.